Hello and welcome to Natasha Explains It All. Today's episode is going to be another episode focused on the November election, and this is going to be about a very local race, specifically about the District 5 Board of Supervisors seat for Alameda County. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I'm going to be voting for Nikki Fortunato Bass, and I hope that you will consider voting for Nikki as well. So let's jump into it. So on the November ballot, one of the local races for Alameda County in California is going to be for the supervisor of District 5. Now, what is that about? So Alameda County has a county government. They're called the Board of Supervisors, and they function like the county government. And there are 5 districts. Alameda County is broken up into 5 districts. And District 5 encompasses parts of Oakland, Albany, Berkeley, Emeryville, and Piedmont. And the incumbent for that position, for that supervisor, a man named Keith Carson, is retiring after some 30 years. So there's an open seat, and there are 2 people who made it out of the primary earlier this year and are running for the seat now in November. And one of those people is Nikki Bass, who I am endorsing, and the other candidate is John Bouters. And I'm going to be talking about their qualifications and some of the issues that are particularly important to me. And of course, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, and this is some food for thought as you get ready to fill out your ballots. And of course, I encourage you to do some of your own research. And part of that own research, I'll be putting a link in the show notes that on September 5th, so coming up next week, on September 5th, from 4 to 5:30 p.m., there is going to be a candidate forum over Zoom that is being hosted by the East Bay Supportive Housing Collaborative, Families Advocating for the Seriously Mentally Ill, and the Interfaith Coalition for Justice in Our Jails. So again, that's going to be September 5th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. There's going to be a candidate forum with the 2 of them, so you can hear directly from them. And again, I will put the link to that in the show notes. Okay, so going back, Nikki Bass running for Supervisor District 5 of Alameda County. As I mentioned, the Board of Supervisors is the county government for Alameda County, and they have various very important roles in overseeing the county, which includes not only coordination between the various cities that make up the county to ensure effective use of resources and coordination on all kinds of topics. They also oversee the county hospital system. They also oversee the County Office of Violence Prevention, all kinds of county public health and public safety systems, including the county sheriff. And this is going to be, for me, one of the key issues because the Board of Supervisors up to now has been very lax in terms of exercising any type of oversight over the county sheriff, even though the Board of Supervisors sets the sheriff's budget. So they actually have a lot of power over the sheriff. They just don't choose to exercise it. And one of the big issues that has been coming up over and over again in the last several years is oversight of the county sheriff. And the current makeup of the Board of Supervisors, they have been continuing to kick the can down the road and not get it done. And I believe that having Nikki Bass on the Board of Supervisors will finally get us over the finish line in actually implementing meaningful oversight of the county sheriff. And this is important for several reasons. There's been lots of scandals related to the county sheriff's office, which led actually a couple of years ago to voters voting out the incumbent sheriff, which is rare for an incumbent in any office, particularly a sheriff, to be ousted. And the replacement, Yesenia Sanchez, ran on a very, change-based platform. It doesn't really seem to be that has happened so far. But her win was in response to the public really wanting different leadership for the county sheriff's office. And there's been numerous scandals. I'll get into one of them more later regarding the jail, Santa Rita Jail, which is run. The county jail is called Santa Rita Jail. It's in Dublin. And the county sheriff is responsible for running that jail. And the jail is a hellhole. Over 70 people have died there in the past decade. The county has been sued over and over and over again because of deaths in the jail, because of a lack of mental health services in the jail, because of just the horrific, torturous conditions in the jail, which are costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean hundreds of millions of dollars that taxpayers are paying because the sheriff is doing a terrible job in running the jail. Contributing to that is there was an audit done a few years ago that showed that several of the sheriff's deputies that are on duty are unfit to carry firearms and make arrests, but they were allowed to work anyway. And one of them ended up killing a few people as he was like coming off his shift. Anyway, so there have been numerous scandals related to how the Alameda County Sheriff's Department operates. And the Board of Supervisors is responsible for providing oversight. Now, based on the things that I just mentioned, you can see that there has been a dearth of actual oversight that is ensuring that the public is protected and that the public's resources are being used effectively. And instead, we're just dealing with taxpayer-funded lawsuit after lawsuit because people are being mistreated and killed in the jail that is the county sheriff's responsibility. So this is one of the duties of the Board of Supervisors to provide sheriff oversight, and it is badly needed. And I think that Nikki Fortunato Bass is going to do a better job of making that happen rather than the other candidate, Bouters. And I will explain a few reasons why I believe that to be the case. And one of them, just to start out with, is the fact that the sheriff's union is backing Bouters and they've poured in significant money into his candidacy. So if they're supporting him, they are assuming then that he's not going to shake things up too much. And that, I think, if I were to, summarize the race in one sentence, it would be that Nikki is the right candidate because we need change. And Bouters is going to be just more of the same, more of the status quo, and we really need change right now. So with those things in mind, let's get into some more details about Nikki and then some more of the contrasting points, and particularly looping back to the public safety question, because that is a key issue in this race, not only about oversight of the county sheriff, but then other public safety related issues. So let's get into, I'm just going to talk very briefly about Nikki's background. She is Filipino American. Both of her parents are from the Philippines. They emigrated from the Philippines to the United States. They went to work in healthcare. She grew up in Virginia, but moved to the Bay Area many years ago. She went to Berkeley and, started doing labor organizing from a very young age. She was very involved in the student anti-sweatshop movement when she was at UC Berkeley, and has done a lot of work in organizing Chinatown garment workers and doing other efforts for workers, including fair pay and working conditions issues. And she's been recognized for that accordingly because she has received the endorsement of all of the major labor unions in the area, with the exception of a few that have endorsed Bouters. A couple of the firefighting unions, and as I mentioned before, a sheriff's union is endorsing Bouters. Nikki has received a 100% rating by both Planned Parenthood so reproductive rights, as well as Moms Demand Action, which is an anti-gun violence group. And I'm going to go back to gun violence later in this episode because it is an important issue in Alameda County. And in terms of her political experience, she has been on the Oakland City Council since 2019. She's also been the president of the city council, and she remains in that position as of now. Bouters also has city council experience for a much smaller city neighboring Emeryville. He has also been the mayor of Emeryville, but it's not an elected position in the sense that if you're on the city council of Emeryville, those positions rotate. So, each member on the city council will become mayor at some point. So he's had that position. And so they both have local government experience. But I think the fact that Nikki has had experience at the Oakland city level, it's a much larger city, big, complicated, high profile city, is going to be more relevant and more helpful experience for dealing with county level government. And I'll get into some additional examples in a moment. So I mentioned that the question about who is funding their campaigns is, it's always an important question, right? You want to look at who's not only endorsing, but then who's funding. And I mentioned that Bouters is getting a lot of funding from, there's like a independent committee related to the Deputy Sheriff's Union. So again, the sheriff's deputies clearly don't think that Bouters is going to, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name. I do believe it's Bouters. But they don't believe that he is going to be shaking up the status quo. And that's really what we need to ensure public safety in Alameda County. He's also received money from tech people. And whereas, as I mentioned before, Nikki has been receiving a lot of her money from either labor unions or individuals. And then, some, for both of them, honestly, they also have been receiving donations from some government officials. And that's like a whole other discussion about how that's even lawful, but whatever. That's the American system we have. So, anyone can donate to campaigns. But those are just a couple of insights into who's donating to their campaigns. The sheriff, tech, into Bouters, and labor. A lot more individual donations going to Nikki's campaign. And there's coverage of this. Oakland Side, which is a local newspaper, did a piece on this recently, so you can check that out and learn more details. I'm just giving a very high level point on that. And for full transparency, I have donated to Nikki's campaign, so I'm one of those individual donors. And in terms of endorsements, I mentioned Nikki's getting a lot of labor endorsements, not only because of the work that she has done, as I mentioned, regarding worker organizing, but then there's also kind of this strange thing that Bouters was involved in. He proposed a ordinance, I don't know if an ordinance is the right word, but he proposed a measure in Emeryville in 2019 to lower the minimum wage. It didn't pass, but, that's not a great look on the labor front. And Nikki has the support of the Ella Baker Center, which I have immense respect for. The Ella Baker Center is a criminal justice organization based in Oakland. They do really good work in promoting public safety solutions that actually work, and they have endorsed Nikki. On the other hand, a very key endorsement that Bouters has received is from the incumbent. I mentioned that there is a man named Keith Carson. He is currently the District 5 supervisor for Alameda County, and he has endorsed Bouters. Supervisor Carson did not endorse during the primaries, but now that we're heading into the general election, he's endorsed Bouters, which is, I think, unfortunate, but that has that is what's happened. And one of the reasons that I think it's unfortunate is because one of the key policies that Carson helped pass as a supervisor on the Alameda County Board of Supervisors is a policy known as the Care First, Jails Last policy resolution. And I think that Nikki is going to be much more effective in actually seeing that implemented. So this policy is a huge part of Carson's legacy, and so it strikes me as odd that he would endorse a candidate that I think is less likely to implement it, again, given Bowder's ties to the sheriff and to the sheriff's union. Now, I want to get into what is this Care First, Jails Last thing, and why is this so important? And honestly, it is one of the, in my view, one of the key issues for Alameda County. Now, the Care First, Jails Last resolution was passed by the Board of Supervisors a couple of years ago, and then just recently they adopted recommendations from the Care First, Jails Last task force that did tons of work over the past couple of years to talk about how to actually implement the resolution. Now, as the name implies, Care First, Jails Last is about not relying on the jail to provide care. And specifically what that means is about ensuring that mentally ill people are not ending up in the jail when they could be treated more effectively and more cost effectively in the community. This is a huge problem that Alameda County has, and it's not unique to Alameda County, but I'm talking about Alameda County for the sake of this race, so I'm going to focus there. But a huge problem that Alameda County has is the lack of community-based mental health resources for people who have mental illness. And so what often ends up happening is that people go untreated, and then as they go untreated, their behavior gets more severe, which may then lead them to engage in either criminal behavior or just nuisance, behavior that results in homelessness, or addiction, and or all of the above. And the result is that person then ends up incarcerated. And this becomes a vicious cycle of many people cycling in and out of psych wards, the jail, the streets, the psych wards, the jail, the streets, etc., rinse, recycle, repeat, without actually any proper intervention to ensure that person is getting the care that they need, and so that they're safe and that the community is safe. And this has been an ongoing issue, and Alameda County has been sued many times over regarding this issue, not only about the jail itself. Again, I mentioned earlier, Alameda County's county jail is known as Santa Rita, and Santa Rita has been sued multiple times, most recently because of the lack of mental health care provided in the jail, even though many, many people in the jail have mental health issues, as well as the county being sued because of the lack of mental health options available in the community, which are then driving people into the jail. And it's a really practical thing. So you have a situation where, let's say you have someone who is living on the streets, and they're living on the streets perhaps related to their untreated mental illness and or a co-occurring, substance abuse disorder that could be them coping in an unhealthy way with their mental illness, and they're causing some type of disturbance. And so the police get called, the police show up. There isn't anywhere to take the person besides the jail. So the police take this person to the jail. Then the person appears in court some days later, and the judge is looking at the person and understands that this person needs help. But if there's nowhere else to send this person besides the jail, the judge is going to feel like their hands are tied and is going to keep the person in the jail, even though the jail is truly the worst person with someone with mental illness. I mentioned earlier that over 70 people have died in the jail in the past decade. And I don't remember the exact number of those that have been suicides, but it's quite high number. So many of the people who have died in the jail are mentally ill, and they have either died via suicide or neglect from staff. There have been many cases about this. And with each death, not only is that a horrible, completely preventable loss of life, but then the county gets sued and there's millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars spent on that to resolve that. Quote unquote, resolve that, right? Basically to pay off the remaining family of the person who died. And this is just not a sustainable public safety system. Alameda County really needs to invest in community-based options at various levels of intervention. So we need more psychiatric beds, so people that are having psychotic episodes or people who need long-term care can receive that residential care. We need more respite homes. We need more wraparound services. There are many, many needed interventions that the Care First Jails Last Task Force put together, and the Board of Supervisors recently voted on to endorse. But now it's a matter of implementing that so that we can have actual robust community-based mental health services, which are proven over and over again to be more effective at treating people and far more cost-effective than sending people to jail. And so now is the question about actually implementing these recommendations. And I believe that Nikki will be more effective at getting that done. She'll be the vote to get it done. She will push the issue and get Care First Jails Last actually implemented. Now, why do I think that? Not only because of what I mentioned before about Bouters being quite close to the sheriff, and I think that that is going to make him reticent to implement and vote for the type of change that is necessary. And also because of particular experience Nikki has had at the Oakland City level on a similar issue. And I want to address this head on because actually this has been one of the major critiques of Nikki in this campaign, her work related to public safety in Oakland. But I honestly think it's one of her greatest strengths in this race, and I'll explain why. So again, I think Nikki is going to be the best at ensuring Carson's legacy of actually implementing Care First Jails Last, not only because of the other candidates' affiliations, but also because of Nikki's experience doing something similar in Oakland. Now, what did she do that was similar in Oakland? So, Nikki was the co-chair of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force in Oakland. And this was a multi-year initiative that looked at the Oakland Police Department's budget and the provision of public safety resources and services in the city, and came up with recommendations on how to improve public safety in Oakland and do that and how to actually implement that and how to actually pay for it. And this was an incredibly rigorous, intensive task force that involved over 100 community members. They also had outside organizations that were consulting and participating in the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, including the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform was involved. And so anyway, they put together all of these recommendations, and those recommendations were accepted by the City Council in May of 2021. And I will include a link to the final report in the show notes. So if you want to read more about those recommendations, you can. Now, the recommendations from the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, which Nikki co-chaired, included a call for a 50% cut to OPD, the Oakland Police Department's budget. This, for some people, was taken as horrible. How could you ever possibly propose this, given the very real public safety concerns in the city? And that criticism was based on not really understanding what the recommendations were and what the actual landscape is in Oakland, and then how it has actually been implemented, because that recommendation by the task force never actually ended up getting implemented. So a couple of things here to tease out, okay? One, the Oakland Police Department has been involved in numerous scandals over the last several decades. And I won't get into the details of all of them here, but numerous scandals, killing people, sexually assaulting people, torture, corruption. There are many scandals with the Oakland Police Department. It hasn't had the best reputation to begin with. And the final report from the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force details some of those scandals, so you can read more about them there. Now, another, I guess we could call it a scandal because it is quite scandalous in reality, is that I mentioned that the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform was one of the organizations that helped facilitate the task force in coming up with the recommendations to really create a robust public safety landscape for Oakland. And the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform did a study on Oakland Police Department service calls from the years 2018 to 2020. So they reviewed a 3-year period of calls that the Oakland Police Department received, and what did those calls reveal, right, about what kind of public safety issues residents of Oakland are facing. And strikingly, what they found is that most of OPD's time is spent on non-emergencies and not even violent crime. So they found that about 60% of the calls that OPD was responding to were for what they call non-criminal events. And they defined non-criminal events. I'm just going to use what the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform defined non-criminal events as, quote, calls for incidents or issues that are not a violation of the penal code, like noise complaints, but may be a violation of a local ordinance, close quote. So nearly 60% of the calls that the Oakland Police Department was responding to were for non-criminal events. And only 9% of calls over this 3-year period the Oakland Police Department was responding to were for serious and violent felonies. So again, over about 60% non-criminal stuff, 9% for serious and violent felonies. And the Oakland Police Department's response time for those serious and violent felonies is embarrassingly slow. According to this report, for serious violent events, officers took an average of 1 hour and 5 minutes to respond. And for priority 1 serious violent felony calls, the officers took an average of 18 minutes and 57 seconds to respond. Those are very, very slow response times. And the priority 1 serious violent felonies that were basically 19 minutes before the cops would show up were usually where crimes were in progress. So one of the takeaways of this study, right, was okay, so if 9% of the calls that the police are receiving are for serious and violent felonies, and it's taking them this long to respond to those calls because 60% of their time is being taken up with non-criminal events, why can't we, right, why shouldn't we redirect those non-criminal calls to other agencies, right, that could handle those, to allow the police then to focus on that 9%, right, to focus on the serious and violent felonies and therefore be able to respond in a more timely manner and then hopefully have better outcomes, right? And so by understanding then, right, how is OPD using its time, and therefore how could we redirect their time to focus on the highest priorities by taking off the things, by taking off of their plate things that could be handled by non-police. That was a huge part of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. And that meant, therefore, in redirecting some of the funding, right? So if other agencies are now going to be responsible for responding to some of those other non-criminal events, well, they need the funding to be able to do that, right? And hence the recommendations to reduce OPD's budget to therefore be able to shift funding to the other agencies could take on those tasks so that, again, OPD could focus on the very serious crimes. That sounds very sensible to me, okay? It's not what happened because there was, so much political backlash to the idea, and the mayor at the time, Libby Schaaf, was not for it, unfortunately. But a couple of things did come out of that were very positive, including one thing that Nikki Bass, again, in addition to co-chairing this task force, she also co-authored legislation to create the Mobile Assistance Community Responders of Oakland program, which is known as MACRO. It is a program that sits within the Oakland City Fire Department. And the goal of MACRO is to respond to low-level, nonviolent calls, generally involving people who are experiencing mental health issues, homelessness issues. And it has been a really successful program in sending out unarmed civilian first responders for those emergency mental health situations, for dealing with folks that police honestly are not the best to respond to, and therefore that they can spend their energy focusing on what is more better use of their time. And so one of the things that did come out of this Reimagining Public Safety Task Force that Nikki co-chaired was this legislation that she co-authored to create the MACRO program. And it did involve giving a small amount, redirecting a small amount, $1.35 million of OPD's budget to create this program, the MACRO program, to divert those calls away from the police to unarmed civilian first responders who are better equipped to respond in those types of situations. And it got off the ground a couple of years ago. And even in the initial months, it was doing really, really well. One statistic I read said that the program was projected to receive 7 to 10 calls a week. But in actuality, they've been receiving 7 to 10 calls per hour. And in just the first 8 weeks of the program, MACRO was able to help more than 1,100 people. And so, again, by handling low-level, nonviolent matters, MACRO is actually preserving police and fire resources, right? By allowing them to focus on emergencies that they really need to be at, while allowing these lower-level mental health type of issues to be handled by the MACRO team. And so Nikki was instrumental in creating that, in funding that, in seeing that through. And so that, to me, is a very concrete legislative accomplishment that is an example of the type of solution that the CareForce Jails Last Task Force wants to see at the county level. And so since she's been able to do that and steward that at the city level, that makes me more confident that she would be able to help execute that at the county level, and something that's been really successful, right? And another example that I want to highlight that there isn't as much in terms of her direct involvement in this, but something else in terms of an example of another program that actually has been extremely successful in reducing violence that she voted for, that again provides me with confidence, again, that she would be able to get this done at the county level is the ceasefire program in Oakland. Now, the ceasefire program in Oakland is an anti-gun violence program. And I mentioned earlier that Nikki has received an endorsement from Moms Demand Action, which is an anti-gun violence group. And so the ceasefire program was implemented in Oakland back in 2013. And it seems to have a lot of overlap with like the Cure Violence model in Chicago, which is about really doing targeted intervention towards people who are the people most likely to commit gun violence to reduce instances of gun violence, particularly homicides that are due to gun violence. And in the first 6 years of the program, or for 7 years, from 2013 to 2019, the program was extremely successful. And according to statistics that I read, the ceasefire program in Oakland was successful in reducing homicides in Oakland by 38% from 2013 to 2019. That's amazing. Unfortunately, in 2020, rates of homicides started to go up because the program started to lose funding. The mayor at the time cut funding to the program. That was former Mayor Libby Schaaf. And the former police chief also was divesting from the program. And as a result of that financial divestment by the mayor and the police chief divesting his staff away from the program, homicide rates went up. And, members of the city council voted to restore that funding, but the mayor cut it in 2020. And so that has been really detrimental to Oakland, and we have seen homicide rates increase in Oakland because of that reversal in investment in this proven anti-violence program known as the ceasefire program. So again, that is something that Nikki has supported, and so again, just as another example of why I think she can make it happen at the county level, and we so very much need that. So, and I want to mention just very briefly, I know that there's a lot of, just chaos and scandal surrounding the Oakland mayor right now, Sheng Tao. I don't know many of the details. Honestly, the public in general doesn't know many details. Nikki has no involvement in that. There haven't been even any allegations that she has any connection to that. So I know that her being on the Oakland City Council is inevitably going to have her seem to be associated with other negative things that are going on in Oakland. But I would just urge listeners to, do some critical thinking and do your own research, in addition to what I'm sharing here today, to understand that I really think that she is part of the solution. And of course, none of this is to say that she's perfect or that I know everything about her record. Like, come on, this is about who is the better candidate among two candidates to bring about the type of change that is needed to really ensure public safety at the county level. In addition, as I said, there are many, many other issues and many related issues, homelessness and mental health and other things. And I'm just touching on some of them for the sake of this episode. So, if you want to learn more about Nikki, you can go to nikkiforsupervisor.com. That's Nikki, NIKKI, 4 supervisor.com. nikkiforsupervisor.com to learn more, to get involved. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, on September 5th, from 4 to 5:30, there is going to be a candidate forum hosted by various organizations in Alameda County that both of the candidates will be at. And again, I will put the link to that forum in the episode description. So I hope you'll tune into that so you can hear from them yourself and, gain some, gather some of your own conclusions about what is at stake in this race and who is a better fit. I will be voting for Nikki. I am a District 5 resident, and so I will be, voting for her. And Those are some of what I have shared here, are some of the reasons why I support her candidacy. And I'm really excited by the possibility of having someone on the Board of Supervisors who's actually going to take these issues seriously and actually going to get it done. All right, so that's enough for today. Thank you for listening. Please make sure to vote in November. And on that, I will see you next time.